too much of your content is homeless. So as you put it, the playground, she talks about content being homeless. And her point there is, it comes back to this first step that we talked about when we think about tagging our content. Before we do that, we need to know what content we have, right? Otherwise, as we said, we may have that 6-month-old asset. It is now homeless, right? Just because it's living on your blog on page 12 of results. I mean, who goes to page 12 of results? Right? The old joke was the best place to hide something was page 2 of Google. Mm-hmm. So if it's on page 12 of your blog, do you think anyone's finding it there? Most likely not. You may have an amazing nugget of content that's 6 months old, but you need to surface that up. And you need to do that by understanding the intent of the buyers who are coming to do business with you.
Aloha, and welcome to another episode of the Groundswell Marketing Podcast, where I connect you to outstanding humans and sustainable ideas. I'm your host, Scott Martin, and today we have Randy Frisch. He's the CMO and founder of Uberflip. He is also someone who has probably one of the most in-depth backgrounds and understanding of content experience. And so we're going to talk a little bit about content experience, content marketing. He's also the author of, pardon my French, Fuck Content Marketing. So I think that really caught my attention. And it was actually inspired from a actual blog post. And he talks a little bit about how that all came about. So it's a real demonstration of how content can grow into something even bigger. So we do a deep dive. And so without further ado, let's paddle in. Welcome to another episode of the Groundswell Marketing Podcast. I have Randy Frisch here on the show. He's the author of Fuck Content Marketing. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Scott. I'm looking forward to it.
I got your name right?
You nailed it.
Yes. It only took 2 takes.
Things out here, right?
So you're calling us from Toronto, Canada. We're both Canadian. I assume you're Canadian because you live in Toronto.
I am.
Awesome. And you've got a pretty interesting long career in marketing. I was wondering if we could give everybody just a little background. Who's Randy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love marketing. First of all, I consider what I do as, first of all, CMO, my dream job, and the fact that I get to do it tied to a company that's all focused on marketing technology, even better. But that wasn't always the case for me. I mean, I started my career always focused in marketing rules, but not necessarily in an industry that I was passionate about until I found my way into tech around 2010. Started a company called Uberflip in 2012 and had no idea what we were doing, to be really honest. But we found our way and managed to solve for a pretty big problem when it comes to not content as we often think of how do I create content, but what do I do once I've created content? How do we leverage that? How do we personalize it? And back in 2012, that was important, but not at all like it's become today in the world that we see around us between consumer products like Netflix and Amazon and Peloton that are all personalized and how that meshes into the way any brand does business.
And you've been followed and quoted by quite a few of the top people in marketing. And can you tell me a little bit about the journey from, just like where you've kind of come to the forefront and you have a point of view in marketing, which I think is going to be our deep dive around this content experience. But can you tell us a little story about what led to this? Is it a discovery? Is it an insight? Is it something that you developed, co-developed? Like, tell us about sort of, for your marketing journey to get to this area of expertise you have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it comes from a combination of being curious and being a marketer and running into problems myself, as well as listening to a lot of the even past guests you've had on your podcast, really bright people like Michael Brenner, Jay Baer. I don't know if you've had Ann Hanley, but people like that who were very focused for a while on the need to invest in content. And this dates back to before I even started Uberflip in 2012. I mean, there was this rising of the importance of content creation and content marketing. I think, 2 people I associate and give a lot of credit for, Joe and Robert over at Content Marketing Institute. I mean, they very much
Mm-hmm.
helped coin this concept that if we invest in content, good things will happen. The problem though, and this isn't their mistake, but the way a lot of us interpreted that was, well, as long as we go and create content and then create more content and more content and more content, then in theory, everything's going to go well. But that assumes that there would only be a finite amount of content, and that it would be really easy to find what we're looking for. The problem that ended up materializing is we just have too much of it, right? I mean, let's take it to our consumer lives for a minute and think about what happened over time. Like, remember when it was great when they added another TV channel, right? And it went from like 20 channels. Some people listening probably remember before that, but 20 channels to 30 channels. And then eventually it was so much that you just said, how am I supposed to navigate that interactive guide? It was just too much. And what disrupted that was this mindset that I'm going to put the right content in front of you, right? I'm going to like change the way we think about it. And we now know platforms like Netflix today, they've got 10,000 plus pieces of content. But when you or I log in, Scott, like we each get a different experience, right? You're going to get certain content that they know you like. And because they know I watched Stranger Things last year, they're going to deliver content that I like. And that mindset is really what's shifting the idea behind what is next for content. And what's next is we have so much content now as organizations, right? And I'm talking blog posts, videos, guides and ebooks, case studies. There's so much content that we're producing, not to mention that our competitors are on specific topics, that you can't necessarily rank on the first page anymore. And as marketing has become more personalized, we need to be able to deliver that Netflix-like experience.
And this personalized experience or personalized content, there's, someone that's listening to that. What does that look like? Can you describe some examples?
Absolutely. There's a number of different elements that come into this idea of content experience. And, to me, it's really, first of all, about where you send someone to. And is it a good overall experience? Is it well designed? Is it well laid out? UI factors, things like that. And we underestimate that sometimes, even with things as basic as, is it mobile friendly today? Right. But a lot of us listening to this podcast, I think, are probably bought into that already. They understand the importance of that. That's what I like to refer to generally as the environment. The more tricky parts, I think, for most marketers is, how do I think about other aspects like structure and engagement? Those are the trickier parts that are differentiators. And, take this podcast itself. Some of you are probably listening on Spotify right now, right? What Spotify has done a great job of is not just, the UI of the list of the player. I mean, that's, they've got that down, but a lot of other people have that down. What's amazing about Spotify is when you go to that home and they have words like made for Scott, made for Randy. I mean, that's what gives me that assurance that tuning into Spotify is going to surface the right information for me. And what's unique there is, when I get onto Spotify, I'm not just listening to one track or downloading one track like Apple used to manage in their iTunes platform. They're getting me to actually stick around and spend hours on there because they're introducing me to new things or finding other content that's relevant to me. That's the element that is going to come into structure. And a lot of that comes down to a marketer's ability to tag their content for scale. I know a lot of people probably listening to this are either working with an agency or may even be part of an agency. And sometimes we just go right to building these great experiences. We make them look really good, but we don't think about the elements of how do we tag the right content so that we can surface it 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road for different campaigns that we may be running.
Well, okay, so there's a bunch of things to unpack there. So someone's listening to this and they're going, well, we've got all this content, but they didn't take the time to categorize, store, even like properly label content. Like I look at, how people sometimes manage their content folders. It makes it unusable. How does somebody that has, maybe a long library of content make it usable again if they didn't organize it from the very beginning?
Absolutely. I mean, you hit it on the head, and you just think about it this way. Even, some of you may have just started a job in the last 3 months or even 6 months, and if you did, do you even know what content was created before you arrived there? Or if someone new joins your team, do they know what content? I can't even remember what content we created like 6 weeks ago on my team. So there's this need to be able to index or find or surface the right content to serve. And the key to that, as you said, is tagging that content, is organizing. Now, there are platforms out there that are often called the content experience platform, and they have tools in place to tag content. So think of kind of, if you're familiar with a digital asset management platform that's going to work really well for content in the format of images and text and product SKUs. But think of this more from a content marketing asset output, where you're actually able to go in and take blog posts and ebooks and videos and put that same tagging structure on there so that you can surface and find the right content that's going to apply. Now, if you're not at the stage of having a content experience platform, like start hacky. Set up a spreadsheet. Excel is good for everything, I always say. And, in Excel, you could simply have something such as, your first column is all the various pieces of content. Your rows, if you will, may be different buyers. And then you start to tag the content that's working in.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like some content that just works at a different point. So when you're making content and you're, say you're organizing it, when you say content marketing or sort of content experience versus content marketing, as a content marketer, they may tag or at least organize their content so it fits within a buyer journey, the classic funnels and different things of that nature. What is like experience? Like, how does it make it different? Because I can personalize content. Does that mean I'm delivering an experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. Let me take a step back in answering that. So one of the very fortunate things that came of the concept of content marketing is we have many people with the job title content marketer. Some of them may be listening to this podcast now, or you may know someone on your team that's a content marketer. And it's a really tricky role, but very often we define that content marketer as the creative mind that's going to write a great blog post, create a great video, whatever the case might be. But as you said, the next step there is actually leveraging that content. And although the content marketer may be requested to tag the content properly, we have to draw a line of where their responsibility ends or where they begin to partner, if you will. And the people they're going to partner with in a marketing organization are often people with job titles like a digital marketer, a social media marketer. You could have someone owning the website or the email strategy. Or if you're more invested in B2B these days, you may have an account-based marketer, an ABM marketer, all these different individuals that end up partnering with the content marketer are owning different distribution channels. And in those different distribution channels, we are always linking to content, right? Like think about it this way. Anytime you send out an email, whether you're using a platform like a Marketo or an Eloqua or a MailChimp or even just your inbox, you are almost always linking to some sort of content asset. But when we do, we have to think about not just will they engage in that first asset, but how do we get them beyond there to the second asset? Does that make sense, Scott?
Yeah, like a little bread trail. So you're like one to lead to the next, and it's got to make sense in that order.
Exactly. Too often, though, like the only step we think about is getting them to the first piece of content. Mm-hmm. And that's the broken part. That's why we have to think of it more as an experience. That's that engagement part that I talked about. Once you've got the environment down and the structure down, you can start to think about creating an engaging experience, a buyer journey. And I'll frame it this way because I think a lot of marketers have been pushed in the last 5 years to think more about unit economics, profitability, ROI. I can throw a million buzzwords at you like this, but the reality is they're all being challenged to prove that things work. And the problem with that is that when we start to think about all these campaigns we're running, right? Let's think of 3 touch points we may run as a marketer, a modern marketer. We may send an email. We may run an ad, a retargeted ad on an ad platform, whether it's a display ad or an SEO result that we're aiming to rank on. And let's throw one more in there. Maybe we're going to even just run social media. It's not costing us dollars, but it's costing us effort to get those posts out there. In each of those, we are going to spend money to get your attention. right? So if I have to get your attention 3 times to get you to 3 different pieces of content, that's going to cost me in a very simple mathematical equation. Let's say it's $1 per engagement. It costs me $3. But if I could find a way on that first engagement, say it's an ad, to get you from the first piece of content to the second piece of content and the third in one visit, I've reduced my customer acquisition cost from $3 to $1. That starts to make the entire engine work faster, right? And we hear so much the importance of accelerating a buyer journey. And that's important on 2 ends. One, for our business, it means that people are going to buy sooner. We're going to turn our pipeline into actual cash sooner. But also for the buyer, like we said, that's the way they want to do business today. They don't want to wait for you to drip them the way you used to. They want to be in control the same way they can binge an entire season or listen to a ton of music on Spotify.
That's a little bit like Anne Hanley. She talks about content as a playground. People want to just deal with content the way they want it on their own.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anne's a very good friend of mine and, probably the queen of analogies.
I'd love to get her on my show. Her keynote at the last CMI thing was great.
Anne's fantastic. I've known Anne for a number of years. I'm very fortunate. She actually is an angel investor in Uberflip, the company I started. So she's so much fun too. Like the personality you see on stage is the personality that she absolutely is, and
a great communicator.
A lot of analogies. Another one of my favorite ones that she'll coin sometimes, or she has coined, is the idea that too much of your content is homeless. So as you put
love that.
The playground, she talks about content being homeless, and her point there is, it comes back to this first step that we talked about when we think about tagging our content. Before we do that, we need to know what content we have, right? Otherwise, as we said, you may have that 6-month-old asset. It is now homeless, right? Just because it's living on your blog on page 12 of results. I mean, who goes to page 12 of results, right? The old joke was the best place to hide something was page 2 of Google. Mm-hmm. So if it's on page 12 of your blog, do you think anyone's finding it there? Most likely not. You may have an amazing nugget of content that's 6 months old, but you need to surface that up. And you need to do that by understanding the intent of the buyers who are coming to do business with you.
See, I like that. What you just described there is what I think a lot of people don't treat, is their content is like an asset and an expense in some ways. And they can recycle and actually get more value for the investment they made if they actually think in this terms and this approach. Am I mistaken, or am I understanding you?
No, you've nailed it. I mean, that's what a lot of us have invested a lot of technology around. There's ways for us to understand who we want to target, right? There's a lot of intent software today. These are great platforms like Demandbase and 6 Sense and Bombora, that help us understand the intent of that buyer. And then what we want to do is leverage that intent, find ways to attract buyers with personalized messaging. And then, as you said, learn from that and start to optimize, right? If we can optimize and I can get you to buy from me in 6 days versus 6 weeks, I mean, everyone's going to win. The buyer's going to have what they need sooner, and we're going to have more revenue now versus more revenue in the future.
So when you described before, you said by having them interface with 3 pieces of content versus 1, is that based on the notion that, something like, I think it takes like 14 or 16 touch points before you really make a conversion? Is that just bringing down those touch points, or is it something else?
So I listen, everyone's going to have this stat that they point to of the amount of content people need to buy.
Yeah. How would you really know? Generally speaking, they're saying it's getting more touch points now than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, whether I've heard 11 to 12 pieces of content, to get you ready to buy. I know that, we've looked at the life of a sales deal before, and aside from marketing touch points, sometimes you've got 100+ sales emails going back and forward when you start to look at really complex, deal cycles. So, you've got content being interspersed throughout all of this. The idea is simply how do we reduce that? And when we go from the point of changing our mindset. And I'll explain. I'll give you an example of what I really mean. Let's think about email marketing, because as marketers, we all learned the tricks of email marketing. And the mindset was, I'm going to set up some sort of cadence in which you're going to get my emails over a 6-week period or 6-month period, whatever the case be. And we think we're being clever about it. I'm going to email you automatically on day 1, and then I'm going to wait till day 7 for the next one. And then I'm going to go to the next week, and so on and so forth. But that assumes that buyer is sitting there and going to open every one of those emails and click through to the one asset that you're offering. As we know today, people want to be in control. And more than ever, as we realize the pandemic that we've lived through this year, there's no longer the opportunity always to go face to face with that customer. So people are in control even more so, and they're completely focused on digital and buying at their pace. We need to accommodate that by ensuring the content's there. Now, it could be, as you said, that they only consume one piece of content. But the risk otherwise is if they're looking for that next piece and you don't give it to them, right? Like you send them that email, here's one asset. But if they're ready to accelerate through their buyer journey in that moment, then what they're probably doing is they're opening up another tab, they're searching the keywords, and your competitor may have a more optimized, streamlined buying experience for them. And what we need to do is we need to earn as much of that research time as possible. Like another stat that I find really interesting is that these days they say that only 18% of a buyer's sales cycle is spent speaking to a sales rep. That means 82% of that time they're doing research on their own. So for me, it's a simple mathematical equation. I want to earn as much time for my sales reps as possible. In fact, if it's 18% of the time, I want at least 10% of that 18%, right? I want the majority of time, because there's always another buyer, in my way, another competitor in my way, if not 2 or 3. So if I can earn that, the simple mathematical equation is I also need to earn at least half of that 82% of research time. And the way to do that is to make sure that they have the right content at their fingertips and they're not going to look at your competitors.
So if I got an email sequence and one was like, they were sequenced and they're trying to bring you along and you missed the first 2 and you decide, hey, I'm going to read the third one. You're out of their sequence. How do you, in this content experience platform or thinking, how do you then be able to get them where they're at? Meaning, they're kind of going, oh, this doesn't exactly relate to me, but how do you adapt, basically to how people sometimes interact with the content? They just, they don't follow your sequences. The funnels it doesn't go that way. That's why the playground analogy is so great. They just kind of like, they're going to do what they're going to do. What's your response to like how to adaptivate to that?
So the key is, again, it's grouping the right content together at the most basic level. So that if someone logs in to click on this piece of content rather than log in some cases, when they click through to that piece of content, they should see other related content. And if they miss something that's connected, they can go back and they can see it. So sometimes we show other recommended content at the bottom, through some of the side panels of a blog post, etc. Beyond there, as you add in more sophistication, you can start to actually know what content they clicked on, what content they missed, and start to highlight content that may be helpful to them. And it could be helpful to them based on the intent that you can match to the tagging you have. This is getting quite sophisticated. Or it can just be based on other content that people have read. And as long as you have marketing automation, you can learn and you can pass triggers to ensure the right content is served.
Is that like rules engine or collaborative filtering or something like that?
Exactly. Yeah. If this, then that at a sophisticated marketer's level.
Awesome. So when I was thinking about content experience, I was thinking about like Joe Pine, he was on the show. He's the writer of Experience Economy. And he talks about taking services, commodities into services into experiences, and then into transformations. And his description of experiences where people, they're moved by the interaction of whatever it is that you're doing. You at Disneyland, you're moved because the experience is so amazing, or someone themes a birthday party and it's such a great experience. It's memorable. How in sort of the context of this content experience, does it apply to that? Is it that it's like seamless and frictionless and that's the great experience, they're not getting it elsewhere? Or is there more?
Yeah, I've exchanged some emails over the years with Joe, and he's a super bright guy. He's talking about that experience economy and everything that we do, and this term experience is really working its way into not just marketing but business operations. We hear about customer experience at every single step. I believe that the content experience is not just about getting someone to buy from you on day one. It's something that we need to think about more than ever. And if you think about the world that we're in right now, a lot of businesses have struggled to sell in the last, time period since COVID hit to us. And a lot of businesses have had to turn from net new revenue to retention revenue. And when you look at retention, it really becomes, how do we help and guide our customers? How do we provide them a better experience? That's where content comes into play as well. So, I think we're seeing a huge rise in customer marketing. And with that, comes this idea of how content is also used after the sale.
Oh, like it's yeah, exactly. I think people are thinking it just as, well, when your first example, very early on, you're talking about building content, and then people basically were thinking, well, if I just produce a bunch of content, people are going to come. Now it's like you need to activate it, and also content doesn't ever really stop. It's the whole content plays a role all the time, in the customer experience, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. It's there is not, the simple way that I explain it is that as marketers and as more generally customer facing members of an organization, so that starts to include sales reps, it starts to include customer success reps or account managers, support members. In one way or another, we are always interacting with a buyer, right? And we use different channels to interact with the buyer. Now, those channels could be anything from ones we've already discussed today, Scott, like email and ads, but it's also even sending, an email from a sales rep or a support ticket from a support representative. These are all ways in which we are using a channel to grab the attention. The question really comes down to, where are we directing someone to? What is the destination? Because in almost every email, in almost every ad, we have this button, right? And the term we use as marketers is a call to action. Click here. This is the thing that we want you to do, is click here. And we typically want to take you out of that channel. So if we're grabbing your attention in email, we're going to grab you and take you onto the web. If we're grabbing you even on Twitter, we want to get you off of Twitter, because Twitter is just going to suggest other stuff that has nothing to do with my business. I want to drive you to some sort of experience that I can control, that I can tailor, that I can learn from. When we start to take that approach, when we start to chart that path, now we're in control. And that's this idea of the destination. We need to optimize our destinations, not just our channels. Too many marketers, we obsess over the channel, and that's important, but it's so much more effective, as we've talked about, if we put equal focus on that destination.
Oh, so, okay, I got a question for then. So, because I'm liking what you're saying, a lot of times people go, we need to make content and it needs to be for this channel, and we're going to funnel it to our destination. Are you saying focus on the destination and then reverse engineer it to the channel?
So let me give you.
Did I misunderstand you?
Example. I'll give you a real life example of maybe how it's sometimes done wrong and how we could try and hack it to make it work better.
Okay, cool.
So a couple of months ago, I get an email from a sales rep of a company trying to sell to me, and they've got a software offering. It was actually a really well written email. It was sent by this rep named Danny, and Danny sends me this email, pretty well customized, and then he simply has this button saying, click here, right? I want you to click here, because he wanted me to watch a video of how his product worked. So I was like, you know what? Good email, personalized. I'm going to click here. He got me. The problem was, when I clicked there, he sent me over to watch this video on YouTube. Okay. So YouTube is great, right? I love YouTube. I spend at least 10 minutes on YouTube somehow every day, whether I like it or not. And the problem though with YouTube is, as soon as I was done watching Danny's video, all of a sudden we know what happens. That panel comes from the right-hand side, and it suggests other great content for me.
Like pandas going down slides.
Yeah, I mean, it had nothing to do with what Danny was sending me. So Danny has now lost me. Now I'll give you another example, right? I'm on Twitter, right? And I'm buying an Apple Watch, which I bought. I bought the Series 5. I know the 6 just came out, but I bought the Series 5. And I'm doing some research, and I'm liking this idea of this Apple Watch. It opens up the review in another window, as we know. Twitter kind of slides to the right. And when I'm done, there literally is the words done in the top left-hand corner, because Twitter wants to bring me back to their infinite scroll, right? Mm-hmm. So the problem is all of these channels that we usually live on, they have this idea of an infinite scroll. They want to keep you on their channel. But as brands, what we need to do is we need to emulate that infinite scroll and bring that into our experience that we serve. Mm-hmm. We need to make sure that when someone opens up that Apple Watch review, or when Danny sends me a great video, that the next thing I'm going to do is on Danny's agenda, not on YouTube's agenda. Now, the challenge is when we use YouTube, when we use Twitter, when we use all these different mediums, unless we bring them onto our site and we have that same type of infrastructure or that same type of guide to walk them through, if we don't have that, we're going to lose them to more of the mass consumerization infinite scroll.
That you made just something, a light bulb clicked on for me, because I'm like, imagine your own website, almost going, 10 other prospects like you also wanted to watch this other video. You just basically make your own social network, your ecosystem, if you will. But interesting enough that people want to keep clicking through. That makes a ton.
That is the world we're in, right? It's relevance and it's personalization.
Yeah.
How often do you open up Instagram and start scrolling and somehow 12 minutes went by? Mm-hmm. It's amazing how they do that, but they do it because you keep wondering what's going to be next. The problem with marketers too often is we don't think about what's next, or when we think about what's next, we save that for our next engagement, our next session, right? And that comes back to the thinking that we were trained on with email marketing, right? It's, I'm going to get you to open this first email, and then I'll send you another email next week. Embrace that first opportunity that you have. Try and extend that as long as possible. And if you do, you start to build not just that instance of authority, you start to build a community experience.
It's like you're almost creating your own rabbit hole.
Absolutely.
Right? But you're architecting it. So you're really letting them dive into your content in a meaningful way. That's what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Amazing. So
man's playground, right?
So totally. I love how you explained that. It's really perfect for me. So we were talking before that this plays really well. It's really powerful for B2B. And I can now see that. Can we describe, when you have multi-stakeholders? So I'll just take a guy, his name's Craig. He's got a painting commercial company in Texas, and he's trying to reach a really hard to reach decision maker. He's got some middle management he wants to influence, but he could be influencing his sale by just engaging with, we'll say, regional offices and getting some work. But he really, at the end of the day, wants to get a global account. How would somebody in this description, is that even possible? Just tell me if it's not. When you can talk about, whether it's your platform or just content experiences, how does somebody look at the different experiences that each of those stakeholders need to move the needle, or maybe in some cases, lower stakeholder to influence another stakeholder? Do you have it? Was that too long of a explanation?
No, it's a great question. I'm going to try and break down an answer for you. And really, it depends on your go-to-market strategy. Now, depends on whether you're it's interesting. I have a podcast myself, and I had a really bright CMO join me named Rishi Davi, and he talked to me about the idea of product-led growth, right? So the first question is, it depends on your go-to-market. Are you going to market with a sales team, or are you going to market with your product itself? And that's going to have a big influence.
Well, in this case, it's sales team.
Okay, so sales team. So So suppose you've got this sales team, you've got the desire to land the account. We're starting to get into terminology that I'm sure a lot of marketers have heard, account-based marketing. And it's this idea of, as you said, how do I get the right buyer at the right time, knowing that there's other influencers to this buying decision. And there's great, research. CEB has always had a report. The numbers has continued to grow every year. At one point, it was 5 buyers who were influencing, and then continued to climb. Like last number I saw was 9. It's probably higher than that now. So what we need to do is take that same personalized approach that we've talked about in our consumer lives and bring it into our marketing. Right? Look at my own house. Somehow everyone's being quiet right now, but believe it or not, there are 3 kids in this house and my wife and myself. Okay. Every one of us watches Netflix and we've all got our own icon. And when each of us logs in, we have our own, if you will, content experience, right? It knows what I liked versus my wife versus my kid and what to recommend me. So what we need to do is we need to understand the most influential buyers in that cycle. As I said, that number has climbed upwards of 9+ people. We may not be able to influence all 9. What we need to do is understand which of those buyers are going to have the most influence and have plans to actually market towards them individually. So take as an example, one of the things that I hear people talk a lot about in the sales process is they'll get to like 90% of the deal being done, and someone comes at the very end and just completely disrupts everything, right? Could be procurement, it could be legal, could be the CEO, could be anyone. What we need to do in that case is we need to have the right content for that person who's sitting at 90%. Keeping in mind, we had to move someone to 90% to begin with their own buyer journey, their own content experiences. But that person coming in at 90%, they may know nothing, right? Now, we don't want to have to take them all the way back to 0 and take them through. They're probably coming in with different requirements, different check marks that they need to look at. Probably it's more of a higher level degree of buy-in. We need to put the right content in place for them. So I've seen people actually go to the level where they will curate a page of content specifically for different buyers at different stages. And the idea there again is don't give them 1,000 pieces of content. They're not going to go through that. They want 7 to 10 pieces that are going to help them understand why you're the right vendor for them.
Well, on the example you gave of Netflix, the one thing that's there is that you're identifying the individuals in your household to some degree, like what they click on. That's identification. So like if you take Don Pepper's classic personalization, it's identify, differentiate, and personalize. In the case of multi-stakeholders, how do you, if someone hasn't raised their hand, like you don't actually, if they're coming to you and you don't know what level they are or who they are, if they haven't identified themselves, how do you then deliver that experience? Or do you ask them to identify themselves?
So there's a couple of options. Sometimes, your buyer will identify themselves or your other stakeholders will be able to identify who is in this buying group. Mm-hmm. But we also have to start to learn what a deal typically looks like. And, in the example that I gave you, if it's the CFO who's always tripping you up at the end of the line, you can start to proactively target that CFO with the right content. Right now, there's ways to do that where we have to get consent to email them, consent to advertise to them. But there's other things that in much more complex deal cycles that people are starting to do, where we even get into things like direct mail, and we send packages out to those buyers where we need a little bit less consent. And now we have the opportunity to influence. Now, that's only going to work if there's a certain level of price tag on this deal as a whole. But as you said, Scott, in your example, your first example, was it painting?
Yeah, he's a commercial painting company.
Commercial painting company. He wants to get up to a much more global sale. You may not be able to do that on that first deal, but when you're trying to sell a much larger deal, now we start to be able to say, okay, well, it's worth it for us to take more of an account-based approach here and understand what that deal is worth for us, understanding that this is someone who's going to buy from us and put a budget towards landing that individual.
Okay. So I'm just trying to imagine this guy, he's going to create some content for each of the different stakeholders. And is it that you need to proactively engage with them going, here's some content follow us along, or is it discovered content? Because I'm trying to get my head around how somebody could deploy a content experience strategy.
Absolutely. So in the book that I wrote, Fuck Content Marketing, there's a framework that I provide that has 5 steps that helps you understand the things that we need to do to get the right content experiences out, whether they're to be put in front of someone, as you said, or discovered. Now, it starts with a lot of the ideas that we talked about today. The first 2 steps, I won't walk you through in detail, but are centralizing and organizing that content, things that we talked about earlier. And then we get to the point of personalizing those experiences. So that's having the right experience for the right buyer. And then the part that you're really asking about is distribution, right? Well, we need to make sure in that 4th step is that regardless of how someone finds us, that they can find the right content for them. Now, let me give you an example in this scenario that we have. Suppose this global manager is going to come and they want to learn more about your company because they're hearing about it from a business unit within this organization. When they come to your website, you need to make sure content is organized, not by the way we create content, but by the problems that your buyers are trying to solve. Right? And what I mean by that is as follows. Think about how many of us organize our website's content. And you can go check your own websites. It probably looks something like this. Don't feel so bad. We probably have format. So all of our ebooks are together. All of our videos are together. All of our white papers are together. Blog post is living on blog. That is not how the buyer buys. The buyer does not come over and say, show me your ebooks, help me understand. Or I'm going to go through all your videos and understand. They're going to say, I have this problem, right? My problem is understanding, paint at scale and, unit economics of painting multiple square feet in many offices and consistency across those offices. These are some of those challenges they may have. If you can show your ability to solve for that, they start to understand that you can be a partner for them. Now, in situations where you have the ability or the consent to actually engage with that buyer, now you can start to use what you've learned in the sales process to target them. So one of the simple things that I know a lot of marketers leverage, we do this on my own marketing team that we oversee, is we have a very simple spreadsheet that we use to help us understand the right content to put it in front of people at different stages of the buyer journey. So think of it as follows. If you had an Excel spreadsheet, going down your rows are going to be your different buyers. You may have a manager level, you may have a C level, you may have people with different job titles within those. As you go along the columns or left to right, you're going to put the different stages of the buyer journey. And the most simple way to look at this would be something, awareness on the left, all the way to advocacy on the far right, meaning they're already a buyer and they're going to start talking about how great you are. Now, in those meeting cells between each buyer and each stage, you start to highlight the most impactful moments and you start to map what content you need to have for them and what channel is going to be most effective to get there.
And by channel, what would you describe as different channels?
Different channels are some of the ones we talked about earlier. It could be email, it could be social, it could be direct mail, it could be ads that we're running. Those channels are going to depend, as you said, on whether we have access to the buyer through those, and whether that's some of them may or may not be a possibility or may not be relevant depending on the industry you're in.
One tool that I think just hits to the heart of this, that although it's not automated, it's more human, is like live chat or something. Like I remember way back in the day, I was marketing eye contact. It was one of the first live chats, and they had like little sequences. If they did this, or on this page, here's the 5 pieces of content. It seems a little like that. Is live chat play a role in this at all?
Absolutely. I mean, chat's come a long way. I think we often associated chat as someone sitting on the other end of that chat window and responding to you. And if they're not there, you got that, sorry, no one's here. Try us back during our business hours. We've come a long way. I mean, companies like Drift, if you haven't heard of them, check out drift.com. They're doing some really cool things with what they call their Driftbot. So automating those conversations, understanding the questions to ask, having canned replies, and even starting to weave content in there. So I've talked to a lot of marketers who debate whether Drift is a channel or whether it is the experience or destination. I like to think of it as the channel. Just because someone's on your website, they often bounce. But if you can engage them in that moment where you have their attention and serve them relevant content, relevant next steps, connect them to the right people, that's an opportunity to keep that journey going like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, because I mean, if you can't answer them, it's like good luck trying to get them to come back.
Absolutely.
So whatever tool you can do to do it. I just also wonder, like an experience when you think about content, when you're describing before, that actually would be an experience. Like if you felt that you interact with the company and every time I went to interact with you, it was answering my questions in the way that I was looking, and that brings somebody else in and answers questions on their level of needs. If, like, for example, the CFO, his questions are answered, and me being the buyer or whatever, it's answering my certain, questions. That in a way is an experience because you're making it frictionless. Like some of the best experiences are ones that are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to your point, if we can start to understand the information we need and we can gather that, we should be able to respond in the moment, right? That's what people are looking for. If I trust you with my information, what are you going to give me back? So in your example, if they jump onto this chat and you ask a very basic question, such as, tell me your job, right? And if they wrote, I'm the CFO. Okay, great. I imagine that you're very focused on ROI and metrics. Can we show you ways to improve efficiency? If the answer is yes, you better be able to link them to content that's about efficiency and ROI, not content that's about how to use your software at a very basic level.
Yeah, people respond what they can relate to. It's got to be relevant in context. That's always one of the things that concerns me about automation is it sometimes can make you feel like you're out of context. Does that make sense?
It does. I think the word there's the term marketing automation, which became a very popular term for technology. Great companies, became marketing automation platforms. Companies like HubSpot and Eloqua, Marketo, and Pardot, and others. And the problem, like you said, with that term is it kind of suggests that you just buy the software and you turn it on and it's going to automate things. I mean, it's not that simple. What we need to do is we need to inject intent, knowledge, engagement data so that we can personalize what's next. That's the role of the marketer in these systems. It's to bring the right mix and determine, basically what do we want to bake up? Which degree of data do we want to leverage to create these personalized experiences?
Yeah, it's kind of critical now because if people are engaging with content, they don't want to interact with salespeople. That's what salespeople used to do. They hear you and they go, oh, wait a minute, like a librarian, let me go find that for you. I can help solve that problem. When you don't have that opportunity, if you don't somehow architect that, you're missing out on that whole process that used to exist with salespeople.
Absolutely. I still think there's an important role for salespeople. Don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah, there's always going to be people, especially B2B. You have to have that sort of. There's who's the human, the whites of their eyes. Are you going to really be there?
I think not even just B2B, but even B2C.
Yeah.
I mean, let's think about buying a car, right? I've had great experiences buying cars, and I've had poor experiences buying cars. The great ones are that they can get me the right information I need to make a decision. Yeah. And sometimes I already know I'm going to make that decision. But if they can feed me information about why that car is right for my lifestyle, it makes such a difference. So I'll give you this really happened to me. I read about this example in my book. I went to this outdoor, obviously this was pre-COVID, but I went to this outdoor festival of some sort. And they had a booth set up at by Volkswagen at this event. And I went at the time. I had young kids, super young. And we went and we played and we had to fill in this form on an iPad. and they asked me about, what kind of car I may be interested in. And I filled out that it would be an SUV because I had, my 3 kids with me, filling the car, doing everything I'm going to do. And the first email I get from this company is about one of their new convertible sports car offers. And all I thought to myself is they know everything they need to know. I filled out a form and I told them it's an SUV. I was there and they could have captured data in one way or another to understand that I've got kids, that I've got a family. Yet what they sent me from a content perspective, right? I know we're talking more product marketing now, but what they sent me was ultimately the wrong content for my life stage. So what did I do? I unsubscribed. I'm like, these guys don't get me, right? They don't understand where I'm at in my maturity. What we need to do is we need to greet people with something that shows that we understand who they are.
Yeah. I mean, when you ask someone for information explicitly, and then first of all, you don't do anything with it. And if you ask them again, that's annoying. But if you misdeliver after you explicitly giving information, that's a hard miss.
Absolutely. Scott, one of the things to think about, and we all do this very much in our subconscious. The next time you download a brand new app on your iPhone or Android device or whatever, and you open up that app for the first time, it usually asks for a few permissions, right? It asks whether it can track your location. It asks whether, it can have access to different things on your device. In that moment, we don't even think anymore. We make a quick judgment call that says, will me sharing this data result in a personalized, better experience? And then we make our decision. Either you get access or you don't. Now, if I give you access, you better in return give me a personalized experience. Now, think about it. There's certain experiences that we trust. There's certain that we don't. We are giving data to Google all day long, but we trust it and we value doing that because Google is able to personalize the results that we get in return, right? We are trusting Netflix all day long, but in return, they're giving me personalized programming. It may not be made for me, but it feels like it's made for me, right? Back to Spotify. Spotify says made for you, playlists made for you. They didn't write the music for me, but it feels like it's made for me. And because of that, I'm more than happy for them to track every step I take. We are going to get to a point, in my opinion, and we've already started to see the shift where websites now have to ask you to opt in to be tracked, right? And today we all very quickly say, sure, accept. But eventually we're going to get to the point where we say, well, did they actually do anything with my ability to give them, with my decision to give them data? Like if they don't start personalizing that homepage with the right content, I'm going to decline that next time if I don't think that they're going to live.
You just created a new app, a permission audit app, and to what level I want them to ensure that they're not misusing it, using it, or not delivering it against what they promised with it. That'd almost be an app.
Sounds like something I'd buy into. I mean, I think it's on each brand, right?
Yeah.
Like we're going to make instant decisions and we'll categorize sometimes to the degree of the business they're in, but we'll look at what their brand stands for, right? More and more websites are leading with thought leadership over product marketing, right? Like you go to a homepage 10, 15 years ago, it was all product shots. Today, it's how we can help, right? And that's the mindset you need to take. If you show that you can do that at the first step, which we can do sometimes with intent data, then they'll continue to trust you and give you more. And then when they actually give you actual first party data, now you have to be able to cook that into your recipe and show that what you're doing to add value from there.
And let's just, I know we're kind of wrap up here. So I want a couple ideas I want to make sure we just touch on. One is activation. I saw some stats about how much more money is shifting hard away from advertising and into content activation. And I was just curious, what's your thoughts on actually using paid content, like paying to actually activate your content as opposed to paying for ads?
Well, I think we're going to reach a point where the two go hand in hand. We're going to move away from paying for ads that are going to get you to sign up for our product or our service to here's an ad to show you that I can add value on the topic that you are researching about. Because I think we all need a bit of a soft sell to get us into any buying cycle. So I think that there is this need for the two to meet.
And do you think that that's going to be a big part of creating content experience, that you're actually paying to have your content, put in front of people? Or do you see it as being the content experience so compelling that people are falling into it? You don't need to pay for it. You just got to focus on getting people to it.
Listen, it's going to depend. I mean, there's a lot of channels that we can use organically, but we need the right following to achieve that. So it depends how strong your followership is, if you will. Like, let's use a channel like LinkedIn or any of these social media platforms that we may either post from our brand or advertise with our brand from. If we have the right followers and we get them to click on the contextual content and drive them to something that is as personalized as that infinite scroll that lives there, great. But for some of us, we got to get in front of them, and there's an opportunity to better target audiences these days on social media channels and other network effects that still allow us to target the right buyer. In that case, we've got to put money behind getting that buyer. The key, as you kind of hit on there, though, Scott, is there's no point like. Maybe as I know you said we're wrapping up here. So kind of a summarizing thought is let's think about where marketers spend their money, right? And I would say that three of the largest buckets that marketers, and forget marketers, organizations spend money is on, first of all, data, right? We spend a ton of money on data. And that makes sense. Like we need to know who we're selling to, who's the right buyer. Then we spend a ton of money, as you said, on distribution. Right? Getting eyeballs to our content, right? Whether that's sending an email, an ad, whatever the case be. The third one, that's one of the biggest, is salespeople, right? Like we said, we're spending less time with them as buyers, but they're still very crucial, especially in complex sales processes. And all of those buckets make a ton of sense. Like, those are big buckets in my P&L from a marketing perspective. But there's no point in spending all of that money to find the right people, grab their attention, get them talking to sales, if during that time we're sending them to a shitty experience, right? And that's the problem. What we don't focus on is where we're sending them to, that destination, that content experience. And my argument would be if you don't spend money on the experience, then there's no point in spending money on any of those other three buckets.
Awesome. Great summary. And I'm just going to ask you for one more quick summary on, you actually asked me before, can I drop some F-bombs? And I said, fuck yeah. I want to ask you about fuck content marketing. Could you just summarize, like, who's that book for and what is it? Just give me a quick summary of what it's about. I know we covered a lot of stuff that's in it today, but if you could just give me a little soundbite for someone leaving, just going, hey, that's a great probably jump off point for them to learn more about what we're talking about. Can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, I mean, it's got a pretty wide audience from a marketing lens. It became an Amazon bestseller, which was pretty exciting. And I think obviously the title is catchy on its own. To be clear, it's not a book for content marketers. I think some content marketers who are very much in the creation side, they'll very much appreciate this book. And in fact, they may want to slam it on the desk of the rest of their organization and point it out to them to say, like, it's not just on me to create content. It's on you to use content. And the point of the book is not that we should stop creating content, but we should stop if we're not going to leverage that content, if we're not going to personalize that content, because otherwise we end up with heaps of content that's doing nothing, right? It's living, as we said earlier today, on page 12 of your results where no one's going to. We need to surface that content. And the shift of the book is on content experience, and it provides a framework, first of all, for getting content out at scale, but also exploring who in the organization, including digital marketers, demand marketers, and other roles in some cases that should be looking to embrace content experience as a differentiator for their go-to-market strategy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on the show. This is a long time in the making, and thanks so much for helping us get a better look at what content experiences really are.
Absolutely. No, great questions today. Thanks a lot,
You
Scott.
bet. So in closing, can you tell everybody where they can follow you and where you like to point them to?
Yeah, sure. That'd be great. So personally, you can follow me probably on LinkedIn, I would say is where I'm most active, sharing content, sharing ideas. If you want to grab the book, you can go to Amazon or you can go to my website, which is b-rand.com. So like brand with a dash after the B. Most of my friends call me Rand. And then if you want to learn about Uberflip, go to uberflip.com. And, hopefully we're doing a good job with everything I said on the content side.
Brilliant. Thanks again.
Absolutely.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you again for another episode of the Groundswell Marketing Podcast for you tuning in. And as usual, just go to groundswell.fm, hit the mic, tell me what you think, give me some feedback, ask me some questions, who should I bring on the show. And until next time, mahalo.